This download is the only extract the BBC has of this edition of Desert Island Discs. The presenter was Roy Plumley.
I believe you come from a very musical family, Mr. Szigeti.
Yes, of course. We were as committed to becoming musicians as boys growing up among sailors and fishermen are committed to following their parents, their fathers' footsteps.
Yes. I believe the violin wasn't the first instrument you learned.
No, I just dabbled in the cimbalom when I first started fiddling around without a fiddle. Yes. And then I started regular lessons with my uncle. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was a procedure, you know, it just went from father to son.
And I believe you went to learn at the conservatoire in Budapest. You went to study at the conservatoire in Budapest when you were very young.
Yes, for a very short time.
Mm-hmm.
Just two years.
Yes.
Before I started playing in public.
And when was that?
That was, I made my debut in Berlin in 1905 and in London in 1906.
Yes. And you stayed in London for some years?
Yes. I lived here. I sort of relived my childhood here when I was already in my teens. And I supplemented the very slim education that I got during my violin study years. You see, I only went to elementary school, mm-hmm. and I started concertizing when I was 13.
Really? You toured this country in the company of some very distinguished and famous British artists as a boy.
Well, I was on Melba's, one of Melba's last tours with John McCormack, with Ada Crossley, with those great Edwardian singers.
Yes. Now, a few years later, just as you were becoming established as an international virtuoso, your career was interrupted for some years by illness.
Yes, I had to slow down. I didn't stop entirely. That was in 1913. But my practice time was limited by my doctor to 25, 30 minutes a day. Mm. So you can imagine that I couldn't go in for that type of intensive technical training that is de rigueur. Anyway, I think that those years of sort of convalescence, it was a suspicion of consumption, did me a great deal of good. It gave me time to read, to think, to not to plunge headlong into the competitive prodigy or virtuoso life.
When did you first record?
Oh, that was very early. That was in Caruso's days, and it was in the days of the papier-mâché horn into which you had to play. And it was a very primitive era of it was in its infancy, as you can imagine. I first made my records for HMV down at City Road.
So you've been in the gramophone catalogues for over half a century?
Yes, practically all my career.
Tell me about the instruments you play, Mr. Szigeti. How many violins do you usually travel with you?
2. I have 2 Guarneris. One of them, the one I had in the 20s and played in the 20s, was the so-called Henri Petri Guarneri. Henri Petri was Egon Petri's father,
yes,
a famous violinist. And the one I play on now is the so-called Count Baldeschi Guarneri, dated 1701.
Mm-hmm. Now, world travel used to be a reasonably relaxed business of spending days or weeks on boats or trains.
I think back with nostalgia
now
to those days.
The jet plane has really changed the tempo.
Yes, and changed it for the worse. Because, as you know, singers don't last as long as they used to. We instrumentalists probably don't mature as one could in those days. You just are driven from one continent to the other. I was on the plane up to its crash, in which Carole Lombard perished in 1942. I was on a tour and she was on a bond selling tour. She sold war bonds.
Yes.
And when some test pilots at one of the intermediary stops had to be given seats, I was told to give up mine. And that saved my life. Mm-hmm. It crashed about half an hour later.
Are you superstitious, as many artists are?
No. My wife takes care of that. She is.
Mr. Szigeti, you're known to have a very large repertoire and to be particularly devoted to contemporary works. Which are the works that you're proudest to have given the first performance of?
Well, I would say the one work that has passed into the repertoire is the Prokofiev First Concerto. And the other one that has recently had several recordings, among them one by Yehudi Menuhin, is the Ernest Bloch Concerto, which I played here with Sir Thomas at a Royal Philharmonic concert. But of course, when I look back on my career, the name of Bartók looms large.
Yes.
And although I can't say that the second sonata, which I often played with him, or the first Rhapsody, or contrasts, have become household words, yet I think they are in a fair way of becoming. And naturally, there were many other things by Albert Roussel, by Milhaud, and so on. You know, it's very difficult to choose among so many children that one has nurtured.
Of course.
You can realize that.
At one time you had a considerable interest in jazz. Do you still have that interest?
I think it has abated somewhat. You know, in those days, in the 20s, and this is linked up, of course, with this particular Bartók work, Contrasts, and I suggested that he writes something for piano, violin, and clarinet, having in mind Benny Goodman, with whom I had been very friendly all these last years. It was really with him in mind that I made this suggestion. I realized that Bartók didn't know anything about Goodman's notoriety and celebrity, so I had Benny send him a batch of his records so that he could familiarize himself with Benny's playing style. He delivered this extraordinarily successful work. I mean, this is not my opinion, but it's the consensus of all musicians and composers, because the assignment of writing for this very unusual combination is a real challenge. He delivered it during this summer, and very soon we gave its first performance at Carnegie Hall with a great deal of writing and talking and discussion attending this premiere. The fast portion of this three-movement work involves something that was usual perhaps in the 17th or 18th centuries, but quite unknown now, namely a violin tuned not E, A, D, G, but F, A, D, G sharp. I had to change over very quickly in public performance, because you can't tune in the middle while the thing is rushing on. So this was an additional new aspect of the composition, and gave rise to a lot of talk.